Dame Judith Hackett said, please don't wait for guidance.
On the 6th of April 2024, the whole regime will have changed.
Nothing's changing, but everything's changing.
A increased emphasis on proving competency, proving why selections have been made.
Competence is driving everything.
Welcome to another series of Constructive Conversations by Resibuild. I'm Nick Horton from Sapphire Balconies on behalf of Resibuild. Today I'm interviewing David Jones, who is the Vice President of the Institute of Construction Management. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Nick.
So today we're going to be talking about the new building safety regime and all of the changes which are coming in on the 6th of April 2024. We've got some insightful conversations and topics to touch on, which hopefully will give some key takeaways to our listeners. So, David, starting off with, obviously the 6th of April is just right upon us now. What's changing?
What's changing? In a way, nothing's changing, but everything's changing. Yeah. Following the fire, the Grenfell fire, it's enhanced rights of protection, new planning and building control gateways, the establishment of the building safety regulator, leasehold protection, focus on construction products, golden thread of safety information, 3 gateways approval process, residents engagement strategy, enforcement of the regulator, by the regulator rather, and occupation phase, the requirements. You know, it's all been there since 1974. It's been there before that. So this is why I say nothing has changed, you know. 1974 Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act was the enabling act in those days to set safety. Looking after employees, looking after those around the building. So nothing's really changed. It's there. But I think we've overlooked that. And when you look at the Building Safety Act in detail, there's a lot of schedules. And Schedule 1 is just about a couple of pages. And it actually is a set of amendments to the old 1974 Health and Safety at Work Act. Why? Only to enable the changes of bringing in the new building safety regulator and things like that. In essence, nothing has changed. The 1974 Building Health and Safety at Work Act has got it all there. What we're now doing, I think, is regulating and more putting it into chunks of regulatory information that the professionals that should have been doing it anyway have got to now do it anyway. And in fact, Dame Judith Hackett said, when she put those first recommendations, please don't wait for guidance. You know how to do it. So that's where we are at the moment.
So a really insightful way of interpreting that. And if we go back to what's changing on the 6th question, we're entering into a whole new approach, which brings with it a lot of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. That fundamentally is falling from the primary legislation. In your mind, David, what are the key parts of that primary legislation which are driving this change? What are the main acts, if you like, which come from it?
The main thing that's overheating the industry is that competence is driving everything, because no one's going to produce a safe system if they're not competent in doing that. That's fundamental. But what the Building Safety Act has done now is said, look, you've got to prove your competence. At the moment, we're in that stage now where all the bodies, all the professional bodies are working out their the metrics, the way that you prove competence. We started with the the PAS 8670 framework for competence, which sort of set up the type of approach that, and now we've broken into 8671, 2 and 3, the PAS, the publicly available standards on the competence, covering the principal designer, 8671, principal contractor, 8672, and the manager. That's after the construction phase, and also the management of the process through the construction phase. But 8673 is going to be the facilities managers of the buildings, how they do it. And that then leads on to the safety case management. And I say management. Now, everyone's concentrating at the moment on safety case report. But hang on, safety case report is only a snapshot, one-day snapshot of a safety case system, I think a lot of the industry is going to be caught out. They're furiously producing these glossy, we don't know what they're like, but I rather expect it's very much like when the CDM coordinator was first introduced. They produced all these wonderful glossy health and safety that just got on chief exec desks and filing cabinets and bookshelves. They thought they'd done it, just producing that sort of document. I think swathes of the professionals in the industry at the moment probably think, let's get through this safety case report, and we're sort of home and dry. Everything can then workarounds and same old. I don't think it's going to be that. And I think there's drivers in the system that will drive this. So it's an interesting point at the moment.
So if we're working back into kind of the legislation you touched, competency is obviously one of the key components, isn't it, which is touched on. But primary legislation, we've got the Building Safety Act, and we've got the Fire Safety Act, which there's quite a bit of overlap.
Sure.
Yes, absolutely, there has to be. And this really comes from really a combination of the Hackett recommendations. The 9 points you touched on are very closely aligned to the Hackett recommendations, aren't they? And there's other aspects which are being covered as well, which have come out of the Grenfell findings, for example, second stair core, which are also being implemented through, for example, the Mayor of London has implemented it as well in that aspect. So we've got a number of things changing. On the 6th of April, we've got a date which is changing the regime. With that creates, as you say, the need to prove competency rather than it being very prescriptive about how things were done to actually deem it as being competent.
Yeah.
But the legislation, there's a lot of secondary legislation. It would be good to just touch on perhaps just a few of those which are yet to be confirmed, because obviously some of the secondary legislation off the back of those, we've got Part B, which has changed. It's been updated a few times.
Sure.
There we've also got a number like BS 9991 and so on, which was talked about as being launched by now, but is yet to be.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about the secondary legislation we're still waiting for in terms of competency, in terms of the different components which come out of that primary legislation.
It's meshing competence to understand the role that you're playing to do this, and also competence to understand the materials that you're playing, the science, understanding the science behind this thing. I think the fire gave us this, that we cannot take bits of paper at face value. We've actually got to know and understand the science behind materials. We had this limited combustibility. What is limited combustibility? It's a fuel. It's burning. Diesel fuel burns slightly at a slower rate than petrol, but they're still the same material. And does it matter that the building burns a little bit slower, or that if you understand the basic principles of fire and things like that, the science of it and the chemistry, would you actually put a hydrocarbon, if you knew that, the fuel, would you actually put a fuel on the outside of a building? That's and that came out in the inquiry that I think one of the eminent professors said it was the equivalent of hanging a laden petrol tanker on each one of those elevations of the building. But did we know that? No, we didn't. Because why didn't we know it? Because it was a hydrocarbon, a really flammable fuel in a tin can, basically, aluminium tin can that melted at 600 degrees, etc. And we know all of that. So understanding that, had the science been properly known at that point, would any designer in his right mind have hung that stuff on the buildings? It's these basics, understanding.
So you touched on the review of Grenfell. We've got kind of there's two, isn't there? The first one focuses on the construction and the design of the building. The second one focuses on the emergency response and the aspects of what happened on that tragic night. We saw kind of 5 key things, if we're summarising it into buckets, if you like. You've got the web of blame. There's a very detailed diagram, isn't it, in the closing statements of Grenfell. If anyone hasn't watched it, it's well worth a watch, isn't it? You've got the materials and the design of the building. You've got the lack of competency. You've got the ethical challenges, and you've got the insufficient oversight as being kind of the buckets which they're falling into. So ultimately, the changes on the 6th of April are centred around addressing those points and actually nailing down who is accountable, what is their competency, why is that person being selected, why is that material being selected. And so the onus is now changing as of the 6th to actually be able to prove that is the case, that you've got competent people involved for the right reasons, and that the materials being put into the specification are the right products in there. Tell us a bit more about what you think will actually be the practical changes from the 6th of April onwards.
Yeah. One big one is going to be the declaration that the client has to make of competence. Yeah. In past times, clients would say, it's an architect, that's a surveyor, they're doing this sort of work, we'll just give them the job. Yeah. Now, the client has got to declare how, and it is, we're going back to these why, I think this why word now is going to become a big driver. Why are you competent? Why have you done this? Why have you selected this material? Yeah? The client is now going to have to say, why did you select this person to do that job? So that declaration of competence, they're going to have to explain to the building safety regulator the process and those reasons. And if there are gaps in that, they're going to have to explain why they went beyond that gap, or why they glossed over it, or what controls, what else they did on that. So that's going to be very important.
So taking that in a kind of real granular way, how is that actually changing? We're talking about kind of, rather than fulfilling practical prescriptive guidance as item A on a building has to meet X, Y, and Z, and therefore it's compliant. The onus is actually on proving that the compliance of that product is because it meets this, but it also is considered this and those kind of other safety aspects of things beyond what the words are, or the loopholes which may have been seen in or grey areas on previous.
That's right, and it's having that ability to to understand that perhaps what you're looking at, as I say, a designer, may not cover everything. So you may want to test what you're proposing, and this is where the full-scale tests are. They're costly things, but they're important. And we've seen in the inquiry, haven't we, that workarounds with tests and things like that. So they've got to be competent as well. You've got to understand the testing houses that, like the burn halls were left unexposed, so that people could alter things, doing things. That it's about monitoring. It's all about these issues of controlling the processes that each layer in the process, and bringing it all together. And this declaration of competence that the client sets it all up.
So the declaration of compliance there, what do you think that means from a product manufacturer point of view? Because that's probably a question a lot of product manufacturers have at the moment, is do I need to create one as part of that process? I know the onus is on the client to actually demonstrate how their building complies, but all these components, what do we need to do as a manufacturer to actually demonstrate compliance?
Yeah, on a granular level, you have to. Every decision that you make, you need to back up with evidence. How you evidence how you. We're going into an evidence-based strategy now of you evidence what you're doing, and you move forward, and you've got that evidence. That's proof. That's your proof. You may have to revisit the evidence with subsequent. If you find something, you revisit, and so there's just a plan, do, review cycle.
So if the client is specifying certain aspects of a facade, how do you think they're going to be building that evidence in their proof of competency when they're submitting for Gateway 1 or Gateway 2? Is it by actually requesting statements of competency from the people they're planning to use in that project?
Oh yes, I think that would be. They'd want CVs of the project team and things like that. But then you're starting to look at organisational competence, individual and organisation. An organisation is inherently hasn't got the intelligence. It's the individuals that create the intelligence to the organisation, but the organisation needs to be holistic to bring all those minds together.
So there should be 2 points then which they're kind of looking for from the people they're planning to select.
Yeah.
Proof of competency of the people and the organisation itself, but also proof of the conformity of that product in the application in which it's likely to be applied.
Yes, that's right.
So that's an interesting piece around competency. And kind of where does competency lie? I obviously Dame Hackett has told us that as an industry we need to work it out ourselves, not wait for guidance. However, what guidance is likely to be coming, which will help guide people as to what does competency look like for me?
Well, we've been working on, as I say, the 8670, the British Standard Flex 8670. We've within the institute, the ICM, we've created a digital one-stop shop approach, and I think a one-stop shop approach is really, we're bringing it all together, rather than having isolated islands of like designers doing stuff and materials people doing. Bring it all into one place, a platform, where those that need the information can get all that information in that sort of place, so that will be contractors, designers, managers, in the same sort of framework of 8670. So we've created, or we are creating with a large digital house, Sysmax, who are involved with competence frameworks and various things like that, are digitising what our working group are doing. So it's work in progress. We're not there yet, but we're moving forward on that. But yes, it will need to be in digital form. The law says everything's got to be in digital form. Doesn't say how. So is it sufficient to put a PDF as a... No, I don't think so. I think it's got to be machine readable. It's got to be understandable by artificial intelligence and things like that. We're actually starting some work with the Turing Institute, interestingly, looking at how we can look at large language modelling, LLM stuff, to understand the CV of the person, the job that person is expected to do, the overall project specification in a machine readable form, and to look at the standards, national occupation standards and things like that around that, and bring that all together with algorithms and in large language models and things like that to come up with a report. Not to say a person's incompetent to do the job, yes or no. It's not going to be a yes or no situation. It will be a report, a dashboard type of thing that says, these are the gaps. These are what you've got to do. So those gaps are then got to be filled in, and it might give some ideas of, might be extra supervision. It might be you need an engineer to look at this, or you need a whatever. It goes further than that, because overarching the whole process is going to be the insurance. So the insurers will need a window on what is happening within the contractual arrangements in there. So with the Turing Institute, I'm not a data scientist. They scare the life out of me, you know. But I'm told, actually, funnily enough, the data scientists say I scare the life out of them as well, because the knowledge I've got. So this is why we've got this symbiotic relationship.
So bringing that back to the new regime and what's changing now then. So we've got this project level mandated requirement now from both an overlap of building safety and fire safety, so on, for information in a digital form, as you say. Now, in doing so, we're then kind of, that's mandating the people which are specified in those acts as being the accountable people for different aspects of the project and so on. We've obviously got this mandatory golden thread of information, as we know there, which is being managed by the principal designer.
Sure.
Where does the responsibility then kind of collecting, for example, components of a facade, for example, how much obligation do the companies the next level down have in collecting and maintaining those records, and also of their supply chain the next level down again, if you like? What's your thoughts on understanding of this, David?
Well, once it's in immutable digital form, it will be locked into the system. You know, it's like a ledger.
At a project level? Are you meaning per company?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I want it project, I want it as granular as we can get it, you know. But the reporting will be however you want it. If you want a broad overview, within the AI models and things like that, it can happen.
But what about in terms of the legislative obligations, if you like, of the reporting of major changes and that sort of thing? Where does the onus obviously is sitting at a project level and the principal designer, but how much of that information has to be stored, legally obliged to, and recorded by the people within the supply chain of that? Because that's obviously quite a few levels in the construction industry, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think we're there yet. I think industry will look at this. The regulator will look at this. Don't forget, they're not going to start until after the 6th, you know, when all the, hopefully, the registration of all the buildings have been made and the actual reports are starting to filter through. They are going to be, I think they've taken on some help to categorise the buildings. It will take several years before they actually come through. I want them to do it quicker than that. You know, we need to learn, and it's about this the whole process. We need to learn what we need to hold before we lose it.
So at present, we're moving into an area of certainly uncertainty.
Yes.
We obviously have a transitions period, which has been more recently announced about the proving competency and so on. But we're moving to this process where we've got certain things defined, major change, certain pieces clarified, other bits still potentially yet to be interpreted. In terms of the duty and obligation, ultimately what we're doing is working back up that chain from the secondary legislation, which may yet be pending or happening in the background, things like the JCI, as you mentioned there. We then take that up to the primary legislation, which is now law. And then ultimately, what we're really trying to fulfill with all of this is actually addressing those gaps which have been brought out in the inquiries and the recommendations from the likes of Hackett, of things like basically cutting through whether blame one person, one neck to throttle, if you like.
Sure.
The material and design selection and the proof of why those things have been selected, and good decision-making practices. We've got the lack of competency being addressed by proof of competency of people and organisations and the product achievements. We've got the ethical practice, and we've got the proof really that there's a sufficient oversight to make sure that these things are actually actioned and implemented, which is obviously the new building safety regulator. In summary, though, David, what was your key takeaway for somebody who might be looking and not really know too much about what's happening? What are the key, if we were to boil it down to 3 or 5 points, what do you think are the 5 points or 3 points which people should take away and go, these are the things I should be well aware of, which are changing as of this weekend?
Yeah, in conclusion, a takeaway is that whatever decision you make through your professional life, make sure that even though you're not being asked officially for proof, backup, evidence, make sure that you know that you can find that evidence to back up that, why you made that decision, why you did that. And make sure that when you are looking around for particular materials to use in products and materials to use in some application, that you understand enough about them to research them, to know that that is the appropriate material to use in that thing. You know, don't just pick it because somebody's offered it, it's cheaper than that, and you sort of, the cost parameters. Because, you know, when you're sitting in that dock, the judge isn't going to accept, well, that was cheaper than that, that's why I used it, and that's why it caused the hazard and whatever.
And explicitly that's been added by the new regime, hasn't it? And it's not a basis they will ever allow a change on costs.
And, you know, and I go back to that point of saying, if you find something is too expensive to do properly, don't do it. That's another takeaway. Don't do the job. If you can't do it, if you can't do it safely within what resources you have available, don't do the job. You know, make the job safe, but don't do the job. So it's finding that balance. Again, it comes down to competence, doesn't it?
So I think my takeaways are that the first thing on the 6th of April 2024, the whole regime will have changed, and that will have been, any planning permission will have to go through the new building safety regime if it's deemed to be a high-risk building, and the criteria is fairly low rise actually as well. Any planning permissions which were in existence will have expired if people have not started on site.
Sure.
There will be a increased emphasis on proving competency, proving why selections have been made, and recording of information digitally in what information is being used throughout the project, but also in the ability of what decisions have been made around that information as well. So certainly one of our key pointers is make sure you're working with the right people and enough of the right people and the right approaches that are being made throughout that to actually prove your competency and to build that project success.
Indeed, and that was when we went to the original CDM regulations, construction design and management, there was a little block in that wasn't attached to anything, and it just said the right information to the right people at the right time. And that says it all, isn't it? You know,
so the definition of what is right is yet to be fulfilled. But what we do know is that if we look at the findings out of the Grenfell inquiry and the recommendations from the Hackett review, that ultimately is going to be our guiding line. So
there's so much to be defined, but we're honing it now. We're getting to those. We're putting it all into the various spaces. It can take time, but 6th of April, everything's changed. But nothing has changed. You know, I go back to that point. It's still the 1974 Health and Safety at Work Act. The obligations are still there to keep people safe, those that you employ, those that are around what you're doing. You've still got to keep them safe. So that's why I say nothing has changed, but everything's changed. It's a
great point, and we thank you for your time, David, and we look forward to discussing this critical topic with other guest speakers as part of the Constructive Conversations from Resibuild Podcast.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you very much for everyone who's joined us virtually watching, and we hope that the next series will be insightful into what has happened after this weekend. Thank you again, and goodbye from us.